My name is Anna Parker, and on the night of my 23rd birthday, my parents finally said out loud what they'd been hinting at my whole life. The room was full of people, family friends, neighbors, coworkers, everyone dressed up, glasses clinking, fake smiles everywhere. I stood there holding a simple, carefully wrapped box in both hands, the gift I'd spent weeks preparing, and walked toward my parents with my heart pounding but my mind crystal clear. This wasn't just a birthday present, it was a test. It was a line in the sand. "Happy birthday, Mom and Dad," I said, because the party had been more about them than me for years. "I wanted to give you this tonight." My mom didn't even try to hide the disgust on her face. She barely glanced at the box before pushing it aside with the back of her hand so hard it almost slipped from my fingers. "A loser like you would bring something this cheap. I don't need it." Laughter rippled from a couple of relatives standing nearby, the kind of nervous laughter people use when they're not sure if something is a joke or just cruel. My dad leaned back in his chair, looking me up and down like I was some stranger who'd wandered in and ruined his evening. "A freeloader living off us couldn't afford anything worthwhile," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Take it and get out." For a split second, the old version of me, the good daughter who swallowed her hurt and smiled, tried to come back. But she didn't stand a chance. Instead, I felt something cold and sharp settle inside me. I straightened my shoulders, curled my fingers tighter around the box, and let out a small, humorless laugh that made a few people shift uncomfortably. "You think this is cheap?" I said quietly. "Okay. Then let's see what cheap looks like." Without asking for permission, I stepped forward, set the box on the table in the center of the room, and pulled at the ribbon. Every conversation around us died out. Every eye in the room locked onto my hands. Paper rustled, the lid lifted, and for a moment there was only silence. Then, as they realized what they were looking at, every face in the room went completely pale. Before I tell you what they saw in that box, and what happened after they kicked me out, tell me in the comments, what time is it for you right now? Where in the world are you watching from? And have you ever been humiliated by your own family in front of others? As everyone stared at the open box, time didn't just slow down. It split into sharp little pieces that dragged me backward and forward all at once. My fingers were still resting on the edge of the lid, but in my mind I was 10 again, standing in our cramped kitchen with flour on my cheeks, clutching a chipped plate piled high with crooked chocolate chip cookies. The oven had overheated the whole house, steam fogging the windows as if the room were trying to disappear, but I was proud. My hands were still a little red from pulling the tray out too early because I couldn't wait to see if they turned out right. I'd rehearsed what I was going to say. "Mom, Dad, look. I followed the recipe all by myself." I wanted them to look at me the way they looked at my brother when he walked in from a game, sweaty and glowing like he'd just stepped off a magazine cover. Instead, the front door burst open and my parents rushed in, voices raised, hearts clearly still out there on the field with him. "Did you see that goal?" my mom shouted, nearly bumping into me as she threw her purse on the counter. "He curved it right into the corner. Everyone went crazy." My dad laughed, clapping his hands together. "That boy is going places, I'm telling you. Scholarship material, our golden ticket." The words wrapped around him like a crown. They didn't see the cookies. My mom's elbow hit the plate, knocking it from my hands. It shattered against the tile, crumbs and broken ceramic scattering across the floor like everything I'd tried to hold together. "Anna, watch where you're standing," she snapped, not even looking down, eyes still sparkling as she turned back to my dad. "So what did the coach say?" I knelt silently, picking up cookie pieces with shaking fingers, feeling the burn on my wrist throb while they talked about how talented and special my brother was. No one asked why the kitchen smelled like sugar and smoke. No one wondered what I'd been doing for the last 2 hours. That was the first time I truly understood that some moments get framed and hung up in memory, and others get swept into the trash. Fast forward years later, and there I was at 16, in that same kitchen, trying again like an idiot. This time, it wasn't cookies. It was an entire 3-course dinner I'd planned meticulously. I'd spent 2 days budgeting, 2 days shopping, 2 days prepping. The table was set with the good plates we usually only took out for guests, candles lit, a playlist of soft jazz humming in the background. I adjusted the napkins a dozen times, checked the roast another dozen, and imagined my parents' faces when they walked in and realized their daughter had pulled off something restaurant level all by herself. They were an hour late. When they finally stumbled in, they smelled like sweat, beer, and stadium popcorn. My brother barged through the door first, jersey still on, bragging about how he'd destroyed the other team's defense. My dad dropped his sports bag into a chair I'd just set, knocking a fork to the floor. My mom toe-kicked off her shoes without looking where they landed. "Oh," she said, pausing just long enough to glance at the table. "You didn't have to go overboard, Anna. It's just food." Just food. The roast I'd checked every 10 minutes. The sauce I'd restarted twice because it wouldn't thicken. The dessert I'd baked at midnight and hidden so no one would eat it early. They sat down, half-heartedly picked at their plates, and then my mom turned her body toward my brother, completely away from me. "So," she said, eyes shining, "tell me more about that scout who talked to Coach. Did he really say you could play in college?" My brother launched into his story for the third time that week, while I watched the candles burn lower, the food go cold, and my reflection blur in the shiny metal of my untouched serving spoon. That night, I scraped leftovers into the trash until the sink smelled like wasted effort and grease, and I told myself it didn't matter. That this was normal. That some kids got trophies and some kids got used to being the shadow clapping in the background. Back in the present, in that crowded room with my cheap gift, I heard the clink of a fork dropping onto a plate and the rustle of someone shifting uncomfortably in their chair. Even without looking up, I knew people were reading the words on the certificate and invitation inside the box, quietly recalibrating everything they thought they knew about me. My mom's fingers tightened around her wine glass just like they used to tighten around her phone when she was filming my brother's games. Only now there was no screen between her and the truth. "What is this supposed to be, Anna?" she asked, but her voice didn't carry the same easy confidence it had minutes earlier when she'd called my gift cheap. That question pulled another scene from the vault of my mind. 13 years old, standing in the doorway of the living room while my parents and brother watched highlights of his match on TV. I held out a flyer with trembling hands. "My school is hosting a baking contest next month," I'd said, trying to sound casual. "The winner gets a small scholarship and a summer course at a culinary camp. Do you think we could, maybe, go together?" My dad looked at the paper for exactly half a second. "Does it interfere with your brother's training schedule?" he asked, eyes already flipping back to the screen. "It's on a Saturday," I replied quickly. "In the afternoon. We could go in the morning, then come back before his practice." My mom waved her hand dismissively. "Those things are for fun, Anna. You don't build a future on cupcakes. Don't get your hopes up." My brother didn't even glance over. "Yeah," he said, laughing at a replay of himself scoring. "We need to focus on real opportunities right now. Real opportunities, real talent, real potential. Everything I loved was downgraded to a hobby, a distraction, a cute phase I was expected to outgrow once I got serious about life." The flyer went into the trash that night. I watched the ink blur under coffee grounds and told myself maybe they were right. Maybe what I loved wasn't worth planning a life around. Now, years later, the irony tasted almost sweet. The cupcakes they mocked had turned into contracts and invitations in a language they respected. Money, prestige, big names. Standing there with the whole room watching, I felt all those moments stacking behind me like steps leading to this one point. Have you ever been in a room where everyone is smiling, but you can feel an invisible wall between you and the people who are supposed to know you best? Have you ever listened to your family praise someone else so loudly that their silence about you screamed even louder? That's what my childhood sounded like. And tonight, with my parents' faces draining of color at the sight of what they'd just rejected, those years of silence finally started to sound like something else. An echo growing louder, turning into a roar that wasn't going to be ignored anymore. They thought this box was going to embarrass me. They had no idea it was about to expose them. The air in the room felt thick enough to chew. People weren't just watching anymore, they were choosing sides, even if they didn't say it out loud. The clatter of dishes had stopped. The meaningless small talk about work and traffic and vacation plans had evaporated. All that was left was the sharp rustle of fabric as people shifted in their seats and the quiet, uneven breathing of two parents who were suddenly very aware that their private way of treating their daughter had just gone painfully public. My heart hammered against my ribs, but it wasn't the panicky, desperate rhythm I knew from years of bracing myself for criticism. It was steady, strong, almost triumphant. I could feel the old version of me lurking at the edges of my mind. Anna the peacekeeper. Anna the apologizer. Anna who swallowed back what she wanted to say because it's just easier if we don't make a scene. That Anna was shaking. The new one was done trembling. "You told me to take this and get out," I said, my voice slicing through the silence. "So I will. But you don't get to pretend you didn't know what you were throwing away." There was a tiny cough from the back, and I noticed her. A woman in her 30s. Someone I barely knew, standing near the drinks table. I recognized her from a networking event I'd catered months ago. She knew exactly who I was in the baking world, even if my own family didn't. She caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod of encouragement, like she was saying, "Go on, say it." That little nod lit a fuse inside me. All at once, memories I'd shoved into dark corners came rushing forward, demanding to be part of this moment whether I liked it or not. 17 years old, standing in the hallway outside the guidance counselor's office, clutching a folder of culinary school brochures I'd printed in secret. My counselor had smiled when I told her my plans, circling programs, talking about scholarships, saying things like, "You clearly have talent, Anna. You should go for this." I'd walked home riding that high, only to find my parents at the kitchen table with my brother's new practice schedule spread out like it was some kind of holy document. "Culinary school?" My dad had repeated after I showed him the brochures, like he'd just heard me say I wanted to join the circus. "Are you kidding?" My mom had taken the papers from my hands and scanned them with a frown. "Out of state? Out of the country for some of these? Anna, we don't have the money for you to chase some fantasy. Besides, what if it doesn't work out? What's your backup?" "What's his backup?" I'd asked, gesturing toward my brother's schedule. The question had slipped out before I could stop it. The room went icy. My dad's jaw tightened. "Your brother has real talent," he said slowly, "the way you talk to someone who's being unreasonable. These schools are investments. They pay off. Cooking is, I don't know. It's housewife stuff. Side gig stuff. You can do that anywhere. You don't need some fancy degree to stir a pot." My brother had snickered, tossing a grape into his mouth. "Yeah, Anna, you don't see people filling stadiums just to watch someone frost cupcakes." Everyone had laughed. I'd laughed too, because what else was I supposed to do? Cry? Beg? Scream? Tell them that when I baked, for a few hours, I actually felt like I mattered? Instead, I'd shrugged, taken my brochures back, and told them it was just an idea. That night, I'd sat on my bedroom floor and carefully, methodically, ripped the brochures into small, even pieces, then stuffed them into the bottom of the trash bag under other garbage so no one would see. I told myself I was being practical, that I was being realistic, just like my dad wanted. But a little voice deep inside me whispered that I was burying myself alive to keep everyone else comfortable. Standing in that birthday room years later, staring at their shocked faces as the evidence of my success lay in a box they'd dismissed, I realized something important. Every time I'd stayed quiet, it had been for them, not for me. Do you know how many times I chose silence so you wouldn't have to feel uncomfortable? I asked now, scanning the crowd but locking my gaze on my parents. How many times I bit my tongue when you dismissed what I loved, made fun of it, or acted like it didn't count as a real dream. My dad rolled his eyes, desperate to slip back into the role of the rational parent dealing with an emotional child. "Here we go again," he muttered, just loud enough for people around him to hear. "You're always so dramatic, Anna. Always playing the victim. We gave you a roof, food, support, and this is how you repay us? By attacking us at your own party?" He sounded confident, but I saw it. The flicker of something in his eyes. Fear. Not of me, but of what other people might think of him now that his favorite narrative, ungrateful daughter against hardworking parents, was being challenged in front of witnesses. The old me would have shrunk under that accusation. I would have started backpedaling, saying, "I didn't mean it like that," or, "I'm sorry, I'm just stressed." Anything to smooth things over. Tonight, the word victim didn't stick to me. It bounced off and landed right back in his lap. "Victim?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. A bitter little laugh escaped my throat. "No, I'm not a victim. I'm just finally refusing to pretend your words don't hurt. There's a difference." I took a breath, then turned slightly, including everyone in the room, and everyone who would eventually hear this story. "Let me ask you all something," I said, voice steady, almost conversational. If your parents constantly told you that what you love is worthless, that your dreams are unrealistic, that your efforts are cute but not serious, and then, when you actually succeeded, they still treated you like a burden, would you keep quiet? Or would you eventually snap and say, "Enough"? A few people looked away, guilt flashing across their faces like they were remembering their own parents or their own kids. Someone whispered, "I'd say something," to the person next to them. The woman by the drinks table nodded again, her jaw set. "You keep calling me a freeloader," I continued, facing my dad again. "But you never once asked how I've been paying my bills. Who do you think bought my ingredients? My tools? My classes?" I smiled coldly. "It wasn't you." That landed. I watched his brows furrow as he realized he actually didn't know anything about how my life worked outside his house. "I got jobs," I said. "I worked insane hours in kitchens that treated me like I was invisible, just like at home, except at least there I got paid. I woke up at 4 in the morning to do prep, burned my hands, stood on my feet until my legs went numb, then went home and kept practicing. I built something out of nothing while you joked about me ending up in a greasy diner." I paused, letting the image sink in. "And now that greasy diner girl has something you understand. Awards, scholarships, business offers, and suddenly it's not so funny anymore, is it?" My brother shifted uncomfortably near the edge of the crowd, finally looking at me instead of the floor. He opened his mouth like he might defend our parents, then closed it again, eyes flicking toward the certificate and invitation like he was seeing them for the first time. "I used to make lists in my head," I said quietly, more to myself than anyone else. "Lists of all the times I chose not to speak up. The first time you mocked my cooking. The second time you told your friends I'd probably marry rich because I didn't have a real plan. The 50th time you compared my achievements to my brother's and treated mine like a consolation prize. I looked up, clearing my throat. That list ends tonight. I could feel the tide turning, not just in the room, but inside me. The version of Anna who stayed small so everyone else could stay comfortable was done. So no, I finished. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being honest. Maybe for the first time in front of all of you. And judging by the way some people were looking at my parents now, with shock, disappointment, even a little disgust, I wasn't the only one rethinking the story we'd all been told about what kind of family this was. I lifted the box slightly so the closest guests could see inside, then angled it toward the center of the table. You called this cheap, I said slowly, letting each word hang in the air. Let's put that theory to the test. Inside, neatly arranged on a bed of dark velvet, lay a small framed certificate, a sleek silver invitation, and a glossy brochure. No balloons, no glitter, no fancy wrapping paper, just proof. This, I said, picking up the framed certificate, is the award I received last month. First place at the International Young Pastry Innovators Competition. You know, that little event you told me I was wasting my time on? A ripple ran through the crowd. People leaned in closer. My mother's mouth opened and closed soundlessly as she recognized the logo from the late-night news segment she'd praised weeks ago, without realizing her own daughter had been the one on screen, half hidden behind the winners. I held up the silver invitation next. This is a fully funded scholarship to a world-class culinary institute in France. Full tuition, housing, everything. They called my portfolio extraordinary. They want me there in 3 months. A guest near the front actually gasped. Another whispered, France, like it was a country made of gold. My dad's face shifted from bored annoyance to something like panic. He hadn't even known I'd applied. He'd been too busy bragging about my brother's latest game to ask why I'd been coming home late, exhausted but smiling. I set the invitation down and picked up the brochure. And this, I said, tapping the logo of a high-end restaurant chain, is from a group that tasted my pastries at that same competition. They want to partner with me, the freeloader, to develop a signature dessert line under my name. The contract draft is in my email right now. The room buzzed like a shaken beehive. Phones appeared as people quietly searched up the competition name, the institute, the restaurant. Their eyes flicked between their screens and my parents' faces. My mom looked like she'd swallowed ice. My dad's jaw clenched and unclenched, his knuckles white where he gripped the arm of his chair. So when you push this box away, I continued, my voice firm, you weren't just rejecting a cheap birthday gift. You were rejecting an international award, a full-ride scholarship, and a career opportunity people would kill for. I leaned in slightly. You were rejecting me. Again. No one laughed now. No one smiled. Some of the guests began to shift their chairs away from my parents, an instinctive move to distance themselves from the embarrassment radiating off them. Their social armor was cracking in real time. I turned back to the crowd. Let me ask you something, I said, locking eyes with a girl about my age standing near the door. If you found out the person your family calls a failure had quietly built a future this big, would you still see them the same way? Or would you start to question whether the real problem wasn't them, but the people who kept tearing them down? You could almost hear the question sinking into people's chests. My mom tried to speak, her voice thin. Anna, you should have told us. I did. I cut in, not raising my voice but stealing all the air in the room. You just never listened. The first clap came from somewhere in the back. It was hesitant, almost apologetic, like the person wasn't sure if applause was allowed in the middle of a family meltdown. Then another pair of hands joined in. Then another. Within seconds, the sound grew, filling the room with a wave of approval that had never, ever been directed at me in front of my parents before. I won't lie. I soaked it in. For once, I wasn't the shadow in the corner or the one carrying plates in and out of the kitchen while someone else told their success stories. For once, my work, my choices, my future were front and center. I brought more than just papers, I said, forcing myself not to cry as the clapping slowly faded into a quiet, expectant hush. I brought proof you can taste. I reached back into the box and pulled out a smaller inner container, one my parents hadn't noticed in their rush to judge. Inside were individual pastries, miniature versions of the desserts that had won me that international award. Each one was labeled with a small edible tag. On one, invisible no more. On another, from just a hobby to a career. On a third, not your backup plan. People chuckled softly at the messages, but it wasn't mean laughter. It was the kind that said, "Yeah, I get it." These flavors were inspired by the years I spent feeling ignored, I explained, picking up a tart. This one, citrus and spice, bright, sharp, and impossible to overlook. I designed it because I was tired of being easy to forget. I offered it to a woman who had been side-eyeing my parents since the beginning. She took a bite, and her eyes widened. "Oh my God," she breathed. This is insane." A man in a suit stepped forward, adjusting his tie. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to another pastry. I nodded, and he tried it with the kind of focus people reserve for very expensive food and very big decisions. "I work in hospitality," he said slowly, turning to the room. "Hey, if this is what she's doing at 23, calling it cheap isn't just cruel, it's stupid." More murmurs, more shifting away from my parents. Their status in this room, the one thing they clung to, was dissolving bite by bite. My brother, who had been quiet this whole time, finally approached. He picked up a small cinnamon roll, took a bite, and looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "Anna," he said softly, "this is better than anything I've had at the fancy places Coach takes us to." I held his gaze, searching for sarcasm, but there was none. For the first time, his compliment didn't feel like it came with a shadow attached. Turning back to the guests, I asked, "Be honest. If someone served you this in a high-end bakery, would you think, 'Wow, what a cheap gift'?" Heads shook. Someone snorted. One of my parents' longtime friends muttered, "They really said that?" Under her breath, loud enough for others to hear. That was when I knew the balance had tipped. This wasn't just my private little rebellion anymore. The room had taken a side, and it wasn't theirs. Have you ever watched people who thought they were untouchable realize their audience is gone? It's like watching a building lose its foundation in slow motion. I was standing right there as the ground under my parents' pride began to crack. I set the empty pastry box down and faced my parents fully. No more hiding behind explanations, no more buffering my words to protect their feelings while mine bled out quietly in the background. "You wanted to know what I've done for this family?" I said, echoing the question my dad had thrown at me countless times. "Let's talk about that." My mom crossed her arms defensively, trying to rebuild her shattered composure. "You're making a scene, Anna," she hissed. "This is not the time or place." "Funny," I replied, tilting my head. "You never said that when you humiliated me in front of other people. Was that the right time and place?" I looked straight at my dad. "Like when you laughed about my silly cooking classes at dinner parties? Or when you joked that I'd probably end up working in some greasy diner if I didn't get serious?" His face flushed an ugly red. "I was just trying to push you," he snapped. "We wanted you to be realistic." "Realistic?" I repeated, nodding slowly. "Right. Let me tell you what realistic looks like now. Realistically, I have an international award, a scholarship overseas, and a partnership offer from people who see my value even when my own parents don't. Realistically, I've already outgrown the box you keep trying to stuff me into." I could feel years of swallowed words rising in my throat. You used to say, "We invested everything in your brother because we knew he'd go far." Do you remember that? My voice stayed calm, but the silence around us turned razor sharp. You said it so many times I started to believe my future didn't matter, that I was just extra. My mom tried to cut in. "We never said—" "You did," I interrupted. Maybe not in those exact words every time, but the message was clear. And every time you chose to clap for him and roll your eyes at me, you hammered it deeper. I took a step back, giving them one last chance to say something that wasn't an excuse. They didn't. They just stared, trapped between pride and panic. "So here's what's going to happen," I said quietly, but every person in that room heard me. "I'm taking that scholarship. I'm signing that partnership. I'm building a life where I'm not the punchline of my own family's jokes." I gestured to the box. "You had the chance to be part of that story. You could have opened this with me. You could have been the first people I celebrated with." I let the next words land like a final verdict. "But you chose to call it cheap and tell me to get out. So I will." A murmur rippled through the guests. Someone near my parents whispered, "You really said that to her?" And I saw my mom flinch. The room wasn't protecting them anymore. Their image, their favorite shield, was gone. "Let me ask you and everyone watching this later," I said, turning so I was speaking not just to the room, but to whoever would see this story online. "When the people who are supposed to love you first are the ones who hurt you most, do you keep begging them to see your worth? Or do you walk away and let them sit in the emptiness they created?" My dad tried to salvage control. "You're being dramatic, Anna. You'll calm down and come home. This is still your family." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Maybe, but right now, this doesn't feel like family. It feels like a prison I finally dug my way out of. Leaving should have felt like breaking. Instead, it felt like finally stepping into air after living underwater for years." I picked up the certificate, the invitation, and the brochure, carefully placing them back into the box. This time, I wasn't offering it to anyone. I was claiming it. "I'll send you the link when the restaurant launches my dessert line," I said evenly. "If you see my name on a menu somewhere, don't worry. You don't have to pretend you're proud. You've put your real feelings on record tonight." My mom's voice wavered. "Anna, don't do this. We didn't know." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from her, but it still wasn't one. "That's the problem," I replied. "You didn't know because you never asked. And now you don't get to be the first to know anything about me anymore." My brother stepped closer, looking torn. "Can I at least drive you home?" he asked quietly. I studied his face, seeing the conflict there. The years of being chosen and the first flickers of guilt for standing on the winning side of a rigged game. "Not home," I said gently. "To my apartment. The one I pay for myself with a job you all pretend doesn't matter." He nodded, shame and respect colliding in his expression. As we turned to leave, the host of the party hurried over, squeezing my hand. "For what it's worth," she whispered, "I think you're incredible. If you ever open your own bakery, I'll be your first customer." I smiled, really smiled this time. "I plan to," I said. "Sooner than anyone expects." The door closed behind us with a soft click, but it sounded like a chapter slamming shut. Months later, I would remember that sound while standing in a sunlit kitchen halfway across the world, my name stitched onto a crisp white chef's jacket, the air filled with butter and sugar and possibilities. In the quiet of my tiny dorm room in France, I'd sometimes scroll through messages from people who'd heard my story, strangers saying my courage helped them confront their own families, aspiring chefs telling me they finally applied to that program they'd been scared of, kids who'd always been The other sibling thanking me for putting their feelings into words, and every now and then, buried between job offers and fan messages, there'd be a short email from my parents. "We saw your interview. We heard about your feature. We're proud of you." I'd hover over the reply button, fingers frozen above the keys, wondering if I should give them another chance. Wondering if scars this deep could ever completely heal. I never answered right away. I'd close my laptop, wash my hands, and go back to my station, shaping dough into something new. Because the truth was, for the first time in my life, my future didn't depend on whether they clapped for me or not. It depended on whether I kept showing up for myself. So now I'll ask you, the one listening to this, maybe with your own family's words echoing in your head, if the people who should have loved you first finally came knocking after you proved them wrong, would you forgive them and let them back in? Or would you let them live with the memory of the day they called your dreams cheap and watched you walk away? Our team at Revenge Argonne is dedicated to crafting powerful, meaningful scripts that blend emotion, tension, and life lessons. We affirm that this is a fictional story created solely to deliver positive messages and educational value to our viewers. This script highlights the importance of self-worth, healthy boundaries, and emotional intelligence within the family. Through drama and conflict, it encourages viewers to reflect on respect, empathy, and fair treatment among siblings and parents. The educational value lies in showing that pain can become growth, and that choosing integrity and self-respect is always more powerful than revenge driven by hatred.